There is a date stamped inside your body, and it was put there by a hydrogen bomb. Not a metaphor, a real readable number that says roughly the year each part of you was built. A forensic lab can take one tooth from a stranger with no name and tell you the year that stranger was born. It can take a shaving off a smuggled tusk and convict the poacher 60 years after the test that made the evidence. It can look at the lens of your eye and tell you that the part you are reading this with was finished before your second birthday and never touched again. The most precise birth certificate in human history was issued by accident by people trying to start the largest fire ever lit. So the question is not whether this works. Labs do it for money. The question is how a weapon of mass destruction became a clock, what it can read off a living person that nobody could read before, and why it is about to stop. Carbon-14 is a slightly radioactive twin of ordinary carbon, normally rare. Then, between 1955 and 1963, the great powers walked out into the desert and the ocean and set off hundreds of nuclear weapons in the open air, and nearly doubled the amount of it in the entire sky. Plants don't check where their carbon comes from. They breathed in the bomb's carbon and built it into themselves. The animals ate the plants, the people ate the animals, and the whole food chain went faintly radioactive in perfect step with the testing schedule. The carbon came down in the rain, climbed up through the grass, into the cow, into the sandwich, into everyone. When a cell is built, it grabs carbon from whatever you ate that year and locks it into its DNA. And DNA, once the cell is finished, is never swapped out. It stays. So every cell holds a tiny sample of the year it was made. The date is pressed into something you will carry your whole life and can never open. Nobody set out to barcode the human race. A handful of governments were trying to build the biggest explosion in history, succeeded, and in the process printed a global timestamp on every blade of grass, every fish, and every newborn for the next 60 years. It is the single most useful thing to ever come out of a weapons program, and it was discovered by people who were technically just standing downwind. A body turns up with no name, no papers, nothing, and one tooth can now tell you the year it was born. Old-fashioned forensics reads age off the bones, but bones can't tell you when somebody was alive. A 40-year-old skeleton from 1980 and a 40-year-old skeleton from 2010 look identical on the table. The carbon doesn't. Tooth enamel forms in childhood and then never changes, so it keeps the carbon level from the year that person was small. The lab reads that number off the enamel, lines it up against the rise and fall of the bomb pulse, and the tooth gives up the birth year, give or take a year. A dead stranger who left no name, no fingerprints, no face, still carried the year of his birth sealed in his own back teeth, a record he wrote without knowing it, in a language he never learned to read and can't take back now. It works on more than people. An elephant's tusk grows in layers, and the freshest layer holds the carbon from the year the animal died. There's been a worldwide ban on the ivory trade since 1989, with a fat legal loophole for old ivory from before the ban. So every smuggler swears his tusk is an antique. The lab takes a shaving, measures the bomb carbon, and the tusk testifies against him. In 2013, a team at Columbia pinned an elephant's death to within about a year for around $500 a sample. So the carbon from a Cold War weapons test fired before that elephant's grandmother was born is now the witness that puts a modern poacher away. The bomb is the snitch. It has been the snitch for 60 years, and it has never once asked for a deal, and it is not done testifying yet. The lens of the eye is built before age 2 out of proteins that are then never replaced, ever. So the clear part of you that lets the light in is the same clear part you had as an infant. Niels Lynnerup's lab confirmed it with the carbon in 2008. The eye holds the carbon of your own infancy, which means whatever a 40-year-old saw this morning, they saw through a lens that has not been updated since they were learning to walk. And somehow it has watched 4 decades of things it was assembled long before it could understand. Most of the brain is nearly that old too. The big neurons of the cortex are, by and large, the originals, grown early, kept for life. They are doing the same jobs they were assigned in childhood, and not one of them has ever been let go, except in one small corner called the hippocampus, the carbon found neurons that were brand new, about 700 a day, grown well into old age, in people who'd been told for decades that the adult brain was finished building. Labs had argued about whether the grown brain makes any new cells at all. Some still insist it barely does. The bomb carbon didn't win that argument with a better speech. It pointed at the new cells, said nothing else, and the room got quieter. The heart is supposed to be the one part you keep from cradle to grave. Same heart, whole life. The carbon says no. A young adult quietly swaps out about 1% of the heart's muscle cells every year, slowing with age, so that over a lifetime, a person replaces a little under half of their own heart. The heart you die with is mostly, but not entirely, the heart you were born with, a slow, partial transplant from yourself, paid for in installments that nobody told you was happening. The fat is the cruel one. The number of fat cells is fixed in childhood before a person finishes growing and basically never changes after that. Lose enormous amounts of weight and the cells shrink, but the count holds, and the cells themselves get replaced at about 10% a year. So the body keeps the same number of empty seats and quietly refills them on a schedule. You don't lose fat cells. You evict the tenants and keep the building. And the building was sized before you could spell. Put it together, and a person is not one age. A person is a pair of infant eyes, a cortex that stopped recruiting decades ago, a heart they've half traded in, and a fat count finalized in grade school. 4 different clocks, all telling a different time, sharing one increasingly confused body. The clock is running down, and it's doing it the dull way. No switch thrown, just a level dropping, drunk down by the ocean a few percent a year. Carbon-14 doesn't sit still in the air. The oceans drink it, and the exhaust of every car and power plant pours in old carbon with none of it left. So the spike has been sliding back toward where it started ever since the test ban, and in 2021, it crossed the line. For the first time since the 1950s, the air held less bomb carbon than it did before anyone ever split an atom. The single most lethal technology ever built gave the whole species a 70-year window to read its own cells. No paperwork, no announcement, and that window is now swinging shut, the way a window shuts, slowly, then all the way. So the gift is already going dark, and you can see where. A body found today, grown from air that's back to baseline, gives the lab the same flat reading it would get from a centuries-old corpse. Going forward, the carbon can no longer tell a fresh t-shirt from a Viking's tunic or this year's victim from a museum exhibit. A child born now is the first in 70 years to arrive with no stamp at all. The same lab that could name a stranger off one tooth will look at this baby and read nothing. A blank coin. The bomb stamped everyone for 70 years, and then it just stopped at the press, mid-shift, with the stamps still warm. This is the strange shape of it. Every human being alive between the first test and about 2020 came predated. Every cell signed and timed, whether they wanted it or not, the most thorough surveillance in history, run on people who never consented and never noticed. The children being born now are the first in 70 years to arrive completely illegible. They will be, in this one specific way, harder to read than the dead. The only reason anyone knows how the body rebuilds itself, the new neurons, the half-traded heart, the fat cells it refuses to let go of, is that for 8 years the human race did the single worst thing it has ever done to the sky and accidentally turned every living thing into a clock. We went looking for a way to end the world and came back, almost by mistake, with the only honest mirror we ever had. The bomb has been the snitch for 70 years. It tagged every cell, surveilled an entire species, closed cases nobody knew were open, and never once asked for anything in return. And now it's going quiet. Not because anyone got to it, but because the sky is healing and there's nothing left for it to report. The same date is still in you, in your eyes and your heart and the fat you can't shake, fading now on schedule, the way it was always going to. We measured ourselves with the worst thing we ever built, and we are about to lose it. Not because we set it down, but because the sky is finally slowly mending the wound we used to read by.